A specific type of transition question asks you to change the opening word of a particular sentence. And that opening word provides that structure, provides that transitional language that helps connect ideas and helps improve the flow of the passage. So you're going to see these pretty often. And in the test number 1, there were actually 5 of this type. So you really want to get good at these, and we're going to run through every single one of these examples so you can see how to solve them. So let's begin with number 9. And for each of these, we're basically going to read the paragraph that these are in and then move on to answer the question. So let's begin with number 9. Though these conservation methods can be costly and time-consuming, they are well worth the effort. Nutritionists consider Greek yogurt to be a healthy food. It is an excellent source of calcium and protein, serves to be a digestive aid, and it contains few calories in its unsweetened low and non-fat forms. Greek yogurt is slightly lower in sugar and carbohydrates than conventional yogurt is. Also, because it is more concentrated, Greek yogurt helps contains slightly more protein per serving, thereby helping people stay, I guess it's fit. So in any event, we have enough to answer this question, no matter where the rest of the paragraph goes. Notice here we are listing these benefits of Greek yogurt. And the previous 2 sentences list these benefits, why you consumers would want to eat this food. This sentence also gives a benefit. So notice I just used the word also. That word also actually seems like it fits here, because also is showing that we're adding an additional piece of information or an additional example to continue supporting a particular argument. So we actually like A pretty well. In other words, implies a kind of summary that we're trying to restate something that we had said in a different way, in perhaps a more direct and simpler to understand way. This is just another example. Therefore shows conclusion, right? You've built up this argument, built up these premises, and therefore you're going to conclude something. This is not a conclusion. This is an additional example. For instance would work if this were the first example, right? If this were not the 3rd example of our list. It's a bit weird to use for instance as if you're giving examples when you've already started giving examples. So for that reason, the best answer here is going to be choice A. Let's look at 14. Typically, the ice sheet begins to show evidence of thawing in late summer. This follows several weeks of higher temperatures. For example, in the summer of 2012, virtually the entire Greenland ice sheet underwent thawing at or near its surface by mid-July, the earliest date on record. Most scientists looking for the causes of the Great Melt of 2012 have focused exclusively on rising temperatures. The summer of 2012 was the warmest in 170 years, records show. Okay, let's stop there. What's going on with this particular question? We start with the opening sentence. It says, typically, the ice sheet begins to show evidence of thawing, and this follows several weeks of higher temperatures. But notice, in this sentence, ignore the for example for a second. It says, in the summer of 2012, virtually the entire Greenland ice sheet underwent thawing at or near its surface by mid-July, the earliest date on record. Most scientists looking for the causes of the Great Melt of 2012 have focused exclusively on rising temperatures. So, what's going on here? This melting occurred earlier than expected. The first 2 sentences show typically, here's the key word, what has happened to these ice sheets in the past, that they usually melt or start to thaw in late summer. But in this case, the Greenland ice sheet in 2012 was melting by mid-July, which is the earliest date on record. And notice I used the word but, and that's the key. We are looking here for contrast, because this example, such as it is really a contradictory example. It's going against this typical trend. It's something that wasn't expected. So for example is not good, because this is not an example of the typical trend. It's a different example of a different trend. However looks good. It's like the word but. It shows contrast, right? However, despite this typical trend, this weird thing happened. As such is like, for example, it would be used if you were giving an example of something or a further explanation of something. Same thing with moreover. So really A, C, and D are all of the type that you are presenting some general statement and then building on it, whether providing an additional example, furthering the argument with more reasoning. A, C, and D don't show that flip, that contrast, and the only one that does that is choice B. And this is something you can do to help you eliminate choices. If you saw in a question 2 words of contrast, let's say however and but, say B and C, it's really unlikely that either of those is right, because if however is right, it's not clear why but wouldn't be right as well. So when you see more than one of the same type of word in the choices, very often they're all going to be wrong, because there's no way that all of them, of course, could be right. So this one is going to be choice B. 27. The article published by Forbes magazine explained that co-working spaces are designated locations that, for a fee, individuals can use to conduct their work. The spaces are usually stocked with standard office equipment such as photocopiers, printers, and fax machines. In these locations, however, the spaces often include small meeting areas and larger rooms for hosting presentations. So in our original, we've got a transition word, however, and we have to ask ourselves, is this a proper place for a transition? And again, here we are just going through the features of co-working spaces. They're stocked with standard office equipment. They apparently contain small meeting areas and larger rooms for hosting presentations. These sentences are listing out the benefits of and the features of these co-working spaces. They do not require a transition here, though. We're not saying that, oh, and however, there are these other spaces that do this thing. These are all describing the same space, and therefore we need words that show that building on of a particular idea or the addition of more examples. So for that reason, we can get rid of A. In addition to equipment looks pretty good. We have the in addition, which is building on, which is saying that we're building on something, and we're building on this idea of the equipment, which is what we were talking about in the previous sentence. So in addition to equipment, these spaces give you this thing as well. So this provides that building up language that we need. More examples, more facts about this idea. For these reasons implies a kind of conclusion, right? For these reasons, we will do this, or this fact is true, or whatever. This is not a concluding sentence of any kind. There's no cause and effect here. So for that reason, we can get rid of C. Likewise is at least in the right direction because it's showing similarity, right? Likewise, these spaces often include small meeting areas. However, when you're comparing B and D, B is just much more specific as to how you're building on this argument by saying, in addition to equipment, these things are also in these spaces. Likewise, it brings up the question, like, what is exactly likewise, or what is exactly like something else? It's just unclear specifically how this connection is being made between these two sentences. So we want the one that's most specific. Sure, B is longer than D, yes, but remember, we only worry about shortness and clarity specifically when we're down to two choices and they're equivalent. And I don't think D is equivalent to B. I think we need that specificity in B that helps us smooth that transition. So B is the answer to this one. 34. Long viewed by many as the stereotypical useless major, philosophy is now being seen by many students and prospective employers as in fact a very useful and practical major, offering students a host of transferable skills with relevance to the modern workplace. In broad terms, philosophy is the study of meaning and the values underlying thought and behavior. But more pragmatically, the discipline encourages students to analyze complex material, question conventional beliefs, and express thoughts in a concise manner. So notice what's going on in these sentences. We begin by talking about, with an introductory sentence, about how students and employers value philosophy. In sentence 34, we say, in broad terms, philosophy is the study of meaning, blah, blah, blah. And then the next sentence we say, but more pragmatically, in other words, practically, the discipline encourages students to do this. So we begin in 34 by discussing what philosophy is in broad terms. And then in 35, we focus on what benefits it offers pragmatically, or kind of the utilitarian or useful side of philosophy, especially when you're talking about what employers might be looking for. So when we look at the original actually looks pretty good. In broad terms, we're defining what philosophy is in a broad way, but then we're going to narrow in the following sentence about what's useful for this particular essay. So A looks pretty good. For example, doesn't seem to make any sense here because this is not an example of what philosophy is. This is more of a definition of what philosophy is. C and D are both wrong because C and D both show contrast very explicitly in choice C. But there's nothing here that implies that we're showing a contrasting idea from this sentence to the previous. Again, we are defining what philosophy is broadly, and then in the next sentence, focusing on what's important for those who are maybe looking for skills that you can use in a workplace environment. So in any event, A is going to be our best answer. Last one is 38. Because philosophy, teaching students not what to think, but how to think, the age-old discipline offers consistently useful tools for academic and professional achievement. A 1994 survey concluded that only 18% of American colleges required at least one philosophy course. Therefore, between 1992 and 1996, more than 400 independent philosophy departments were eliminated from institutions. So this is a perfect question where seeing that two choices are basically the same helps us eliminate two choices, because at first therefore might seem pretty good, because it seems like, all right, because these colleges are not requiring philosophy courses, therefore they're going to be cutting their philosophy departments because they don't need them. And that seems at least somewhat plausible, except for the fact that thus, choice B, basically means the same thing. Thus and therefore are equivalent. So if A is right, how could B be wrong? Because B and A are basically the same. This helps us ultimately get rid of A and B. Why I think, in terms of, what if it were just therefore there by itself? How could you still get rid of therefore if it weren't, coupled with thus? I think the major issue here, this is not very clear how this would be the cause or the effect of this particular issue, right? That, just because only 18% require a philosophy course, therefore they've eliminated from institutions. That's not a very clear cause and effect relationship. You would need more evidence or more information to show how the lack of use of philosophy led to the cutting. I think that's the major issue. I think we look at D, however, we're not showing any contrast, because at the very least, this builds off of the previous sentence. But moreover works really well here, because moreover is basically like in addition. It's helping us build on the previous ideas. And these sentences are showing how colleges aren't valuing philosophy, they don't require it, and they're cutting their departments, and moreover shows that building on the idea, not cause and effect, which is a little bit too strong, and that's what we see in A and B. So this one is going to be choice C.